In this beginner's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create your very own 3D printable Makercoin using Fusion 360 and Inkscape. Let's get started. How's it going, guys? Angus here from Maker's Views, and welcome to a 2019 updated Makercoin tutorial using Fusion 360. Now, I've done this before, but Fusion 360 has changed a lot in recent years, and this is using the latest build in September of 2019. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to create this coin from scratch so you can 3D print it on your very own 3D printers. And this guide is aimed at pure beginners to 3D modeling. If you have experience in 3D modeling or using Fusion 360, then this guide will be a little bit basic for you. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create this Makercoin and then punch through your very own logo using vectors. Now, before we get going, there's two bits of software you're going to need. You're going to need Fusion 360, links below, and Inkscape. Inkscape is a free bit of software which you can use to create vector imagery, and Fusion 360 is free for 30 days and also free for startups and education, or fairly affordable for business purposes. And I like to use Fusion 360 because it's very powerful, it has lots of features, but also is quite accessible to newcomers for 3D modeling. So let's dive right into it. Here I have a blank workspace in Fusion 360, but before we create anything, what I need to do is make my Z-axis vertical rather than the Y-axis, which is vertical by default. The reason I want to do this is because when you 3D print files, the Z-axis is the vertical by default for many 3D printers, actually pretty much all of them, but for 3D modeling, the Y-axis generally is vertical, and that's what it is in default for Fusion 360, which means when you model, you're going to bring in files and they'll be the wrong orientation in your slicer. It's just a little bit easier and better to make sure they're both the same. So to do that, over on the right-hand side, click your name, click Preferences, and then what we want to do from here is make sure the default modeling orientation is Z up, not Y up. And then save that, and you're good to go for 3D modeling with the purpose of 3D printing in mind. Now what we have here is a blank workspace in Fusion 360, and I just want to show you how to navigate around it. So what I'm going to do over the left hand side, you see we have this origin icon and a little eye. I'm going to click that to make sure we see our origin and our planes. Now we have our Z vertical plane, as I mentioned. Hold down your middle mouse wheel and you can actually move around in 3D space like so. And you'll notice on the top right, as we do that, it'll show you that moving around as well with the front, right, top, bottom, left, and back planes there set up for you. And you can always rehome it by clicking the little home icon at the top right if you move it too much. And then you can also zoom in and out using the scroll wheel as well, like so, but we don't have any geometry to zoom in and out of, so that's not going to show anything as yet. And then you hold down Control and the middle mouse wheel to pan around if you need to do so. And then using those three combinations, you can navigate the 3D space in Fusion 360. Okay, so how did we model this Makercoin? Well, the best way to describe the workflow in Fusion 360 is sketch-based. You can model differently, but it's very important for a newcomer to understand the sketch-based workflow. You draw a 2D sketch, and then you do something to it using a feature. Now with this Makercoin, I've used three features. I've used one Revolve and two Extrudes. Now that's quite simple, but we've actually created some quite complex geometry using just those basic features. But I've also used a pattern, which is a modification, to get one of those features and then create these 5 little dimples here. But to create our first feature, a revolve, we're going to need a sketch. So let's make that sketch. To create our sketch, over on the top left here, we have this icon, Create Sketch. I'm going to select that, and then it will want a plane to put that 2D sketch on. So I'm going to select this plane here, which is our front plane, otherwise known as our XZ plane. And you'll notice straight away that we're not looking directly at the front of the plane, we're actually looking at an angle. So to look straight on, which is very important for drawing your sketch accurately, over on the right hand side, you'll see we have this look at icon. Click that and it'll make sure you're directly in front of the plane that you're working on to draw your sketch geometry. Now the first sketch we're creating is for our revolve, and it's actually a cross section which will be revolved around to create a solid object. So because of that, we only draw half of the solid object we want, and half of it will actually have a center line which will be used to be revolved around. So we're going to start with a line. Now over here on the left hand side, because we're in Sketch, we have these different sketch options. There's a few by default in this quick selection menu, but if you click Create, there's a lot to choose from. But to start with, we just want a line. And for this line, I'm going to pop it in here on our origin, which is the center point of the entire 3D space. The origin is 0, 0, 0 in space, and it's a really good place to start with for revolved objects, which will be revolved around that center point. So for this line, as you move it up, you notice that it'll want to snap vertically. We want to do a vertical line here. Now you'll notice that it gives me millimeter measurements. You can model in imperial if you prefer, but this whole tutorial will be in metric. And we want to enter 5 for this center line and hit enter. So zooming in with my mouse wheel, you see we've got a 5mm high center line there, which is what the center of our revolve will be. Next, we're going to draw another line. You can actually just hit L on your keyboard, hotkey L to select line, which is actually a little bit quicker than choosing the icon. And we're going to go to the origin again, and this time pull it out, and we're going to enter 15mm and hit enter like that. From here, we're going to create the rounded edge of our Makercoin. I'm going to do that using an arc. Now, there's a few different arcs you can choose from in Fusion. If I go to the create drop down here, under arc, you notice we have 3-point, center point, and tangent. We want a tangential arc, which means when we draw this, it's going to be tangential to that line and flow on really nicely and smoothly from the bottom of the Makercoin. So with our tangent arc selected, we're going to click the point here, and it'll create a nice flowing arc from that line. And the measurement is actually the radius of that arc. So it's not diameter, it's going to be radius, and I want an 8mm diameter, which means I need to enter a 4mm radius. So I'm going to hit 4 here, like so, and then it wants to specify the end point of the arc. Now I'm just going to drop it here for now, so it's not a complete circle. And then from here, I'm actually going to just draw another arc from that point onwards to the top of our center line, like so. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to help you see this. Now, what we have here is a completed enclosed area, and Fusion will show that to you using this sort of slightly yellow tinge. So you notice if I hover over it, it darkens. That means you've completely enclosed an area, which is what we need to be used for most features. So you need an enclosed area to do a revolve, an extrude, and so on and so forth to create a solid object, which we can then go and 3D print. But you notice that the lines are different colors, and the reason that is that the dark lines, the ones that are black, are fully defined, and the ones that are blue are not fully defined. So you notice that I can't move, for example, this point around. I can't move this bottom line around, but this arc here, look at that, I can move it around. It's not fully defined, but we need to stop and think how this is going to look when it's revolved and how I want this arc to be defined. I don't want to actually add a dimension to this. I actually want to add what's known as a relation to it. So this object actually already has relations drawn into it, and there's a whole relations video in my CAD for Newbies playlist, which is linked in the video description. But for example, this means a tangential relation or constraint. And this is another tangential. This one down here is a perpendicular constraint. And this one here is a vertical constraint. So these things lock different geometry in different locations with different geometric rules to each other in terms of where they are in space. But this one does not have enough constraints to lock it in place. So what I'm actually going to draw now is something called construction geometry. So this is a really handy tip to draw in geometry that's not used in the final object, just used to help dimension or constrain other objects. So let's hit L again for line. And here at the top of our midline, I'm just going to draw a line out like this. So it's going 90 degrees from our center line there. Hit escape. And I'm going to select that line. And I'm going to press X on the keyboard. And watch what happens to it. It goes dotted. So this means it's now construction geometry. It's not actually going to be used in the features later on. It's only used to help constrain or dimension other geometry in the sketch. And using this line, we can select our arc, hold shift, select that line, and right click, and you'll notice that there's a few options given to you to create new constraints or relations. And the one we want is tangent. Just like that, that line is now flowing perfectly on from the top of our other arc through to our construction geometry, which means when it gets to that center point of our revolve, it'll be nice and smooth. There'll be no weird dimples, and it'll look really nice, and everything's gone. It's black, it's constrained, it's good to go for our revolve. When you're happy with your sketch, and you can guarantee that it's going to work by making sure it's enclosed like this with a nice straight center line like this, you can click Finish Sketch, and now we can use the Revolve feature to revolve this around. So over here on the top left, we want to select Revolve, and it gives a nice visual indicator of how a revolve actually works. Select that, and the profile is actually already selected. Fusion's clever enough to know that we want to revolve this because we just made that sketch. But just say it wasn't selected, you want to go through and just select the profile like so. And then you want to select your axis, which is what the shape will be revolved around. And it's very important to select the right one, which is this center line that we created here. And then let me just zoom out a bit and change the view. And there we go. We've got a nice looking lozenge shape. It's nice and smooth, and that center point like we wanted is very nice. It flows on very well, leaving us with a nice curved surface, and we're good to go. Okay, we've got our first revolve. Now is a pretty good time to save your object. Control S on the keyboard will save it with a name that you remember in a folder or location that you remember. Fusion 360 is cloud-based, so it'll save even the versions as you go along. And if you go into different computers and log in, you can get those from the cloud, which is great unless you don't have internet, in which case it's less great. But I'm just going to save this as Makercoin tutorial like that. And just like that, we're good to go with the Makercoin tutorial version 0. Every time you save it, it'll add a new version, and you can always go back in time to find those older versions. Okay, next we want to add those little dimples to the edge to give this coin a little bit of tactility, make it a little bit more interesting and visually appealing. Now to do that, we're going to use an extrude cut. And to create that cut, what we want to do is to do a sketch, yet again, but from a different plane. So under the sketch, here on the top left, we want to actually select this top plane here. Now if you can't select it, if it's selecting part of the shape and that's okay. You can actually just hold down Control to try to select other things, or just change your view to try to select the right plane. But here, I'm just going to select top plane here, and now we're going to draw our new sketch. Now this sketch is very simple. We just have one bit of construction geometry and one circle. Let's draw the construction geometry first, so hit L for line. And this line, we're going to go from the center point up like this, and that looks fine. So you can click the tick or hit escape, and we're good to go. And now you want to draw a circle. Now, again, there's a hotkey for circle, and it is C on your keyboard, like that. Now we're going to drop the circle in at the end of our line, like this, and we're going to enter 12, which means 12 millimeters, and then hit enter. Now, once again, it's good practice to make that line actual construction geometry, so it's never considered as the final geometry for the part. So I'm just going to select it and hit X, like so. And we want to decide how much of a bite we want this circle to take out of our Makercoin. So you can move it to where you sort of want it and get an idea, but I don't want to leave it unconstrained like this. So I'm actually going to hit D on the keyboard, and D brings up our dimensioning tool. So you notice we've been dimensioning things as we go along, but if you want to dimension things afterwards, you totally can. You can also change dimensions. Fusion is fully parametric. And what I'm going to do using this dimension tool is select our construction line like this, click once, and I'm actually going to hit 20. So 20 is the distance I want this to take a bite out of our object. You can change yours absolutely to make it bigger or smaller, take more or less of a bite, and it will adapt accordingly. So once again, under our solid menu, we have Extrude. It's by far the most commonly used feature out of all of them. An Extrude will take a sketch and then create a solid object or cut away that sketch from another solid object. So I'm going to select Extrude here and then make sure the profile we want is selected. And then as I pull this arrow up, you can see it makes this sort of transparent red, and that means it's going to be cutting away. But under the operation, we can actually change it to be join, and that would actually add material. But in this case, we do want to cut away. So we're going to go and make sure it's on cut, and make sure it's cutting through the object completely, like so. Now you can just do it by just dragging it lots, or you can change the extent to all, which means it will always cut through the entire object, regardless of if you change it later on. And if it all looks good, then just select OK. Okay, so now we have a lozenge with a bite out of it. Still not all that interesting. How do you easily create complexity to an object and make it a bit more interesting? Well, that's where patterns come in handy. Patterns will take an existing feature and pattern it either linearly or rotationally or even along a complex curve to add complexity really quickly, and I really do like using them. And we're going to do a rotational pattern which will take this little bite and rotationally pattern it around our shape to create the 5 little shapes we have here in our Makercoin. So to do this, under the Create menu, drop down, and under Pattern, we want Circular Pattern. Now there's various different ways you can use Circular Pattern. It has faces by default. We don't want to pattern faces. We want to pattern features. So drop down to Features, and you'll be wondering, okay, how do I select the feature of the extrude? Well, if you look down to the bottom left, what we've actually started to create is what's known as a feature tree. As I hover over each one, we have the sketch, then we have our first revolve, then we had the sketch for the cut, and then we had that cut. So we can easily and quickly identify what feature we want to pattern by selecting it. And then finally, we want the axis to pattern around. Just like our revolve, the pattern needs to know what it's revolving around to pattern. So for the axis, we want the Z axis that we've got here, which is this blue line here, and we're going to select that like so. Now it gives you a preview of how the pattern will look, and by default it's on 3. We don't want 3, I want 5. Maker's Muse just went past 500,000 subscribers, which is absolutely incredible. So let's go with 5, because I think that's a pretty incredible milestone. 4, 5. And also it just looks aesthetically nice, I think. Now, compute option, if it's not working, try a different compute option. Generally, you don't have to mess with this too much, but patterns can be difficult to get working sometimes. So I have it selected on adjust, and hopefully that works, and it does, so we don't need to worry about fiddling with any different settings. Okay, that's already instantly looking way more interesting. We have a Makercoin with a nice sort of smooth center part and 5 divots on the outside, but we want to add a logo to it. Now, this is where Fusion isn't very good. You don't want to be trying to draw a logo using the sketch tool in Fusion. It's just not designed for it, but a bit of software that is designed for it is Inkscape. So let's jump over to Inkscape very quickly. So I'll show you how to draw vectors and export into a format known as SVG, which Fusion will import, and we can use those vectors to then extrude cut some interesting geometry into our Makercoin. So this is Inkscape, an incredibly powerful and free vector drawing program. I used to use this in university before I got Adobe Illustrator, and arguably you could get away with this doing many of the things that I do in Illustrator now. I just happen to have the Adobe package. Regardless, what we're going to be using this for is to draw some interesting vectors and export as what's known as an SVG file and bring that into Fusion. And if you want a full in-depth tutorial on doing this, links in the video description to that tutorial as well, because I've covered it and it's quite complicated, but you can do lots of cool things. Let's jump straight into just drawing some interesting shapes. So I've got the pen tool here over on the left-hand side, and that's going to draw some interesting enclosed shapes. Now, they do have to be enclosed. That's really important, because if they're not, then Fusion won't know what to do with them, because you can't create solid bodies from 2D lines. It's 0 thickness, which is not great. So I've just got some interesting shapes here. Maybe just one more here. That looks pretty good to me. And what I'm going to do now is go to File, Save As, and we're going to save it not as an Inkscape, but as a plain SVG. So I'm going to save it here as Makercoin test. Just like that, and we're done with Inkscape. Okay, we're back over to Fusion, and we're going to get that SVG we just made and punch it through our Makercoin to finalize it and make it our personalized little coin. So to do that, under Insert here on the top middle of the screen, scroll down to Insert SVG. Now, just like a sketch, inserting the SVG needs a plane to insert on, and once again, we're going to select this top plane here. Selected that, and select our file. So once that's selected, go find your SVG and say Open. Now, when it brings it in, it tends to bring it in upside down, sometimes mirrored. The scaling will be different because we didn't set scaling originally anyway, but you can change all of that here anyway fairly easily. So you can easily move it into position, you can change the scale as well. You can also flip it in different orientations, like so. So what I just tend to do is move it into the right sort of location, change the scale, play around with it until I'm happy. So I'm pretty happy with that. And then once you say okay, it's going to be set in stone. Let me explain. So I'm going to say okay. You notice that the lines go green. Now, this means that they are fixed. So they haven't been given dimensions. They're not defined. They're just locked. So because they're so weird, they're strange, random like lines, that you can't really add dimensions to this. So Fusion just locks them so you can't accidentally move them. But this means if you want to tamper with them or modify them, you can't really. You can unlock them, unfix them, but then what do you do with them? So ideally what you want to do is get this perfect, take your time, and then put it in place. And if you do change your SVG later on down the track and want to update it, you'll have to do this part again. But it's really not that difficult. You'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. So we're done with this. We create our SVG as a sketch and select Finish Sketch. And finally, we're going to do another extrude cut. Very simple, just like before. Go to Extrude, and this time we want to select our profiles. Now, to select multiple profiles, you will select one. You'll notice it won't let you select another one. Just hold down Control on your keyboard, and it will let you select as many enclosed profiles as you like. Just like that, okay? And once again, we're going to punch this all the way through our shape. So extent, I'm going to do all yet again. And you notice it might be a bit more laggy this time. The more complex your SVG, the more computing that Fusion has to do to make it work. So if you have lots of text and stuff, just give it some time. Anyway, okay, we're good to go. And here is our final simple Makercoin with the crazy vector logo punched through it. But of course, I have my own real logo, so I've actually used that already in my one that I prepared earlier over here. A few things to note: if you have text and stuff, you don't want floating areas because obviously they're going to fall away with building a physical object. They can't be held magically in space, so you might need to add some extra geometry in, some sketches to hold things in place, and feel free to experiment with this. Change the size, the scale, mess around with things, make it yours, make it custom, get a feel for the software, how to use the sketch environment. And if you do enjoy the process and you want to learn more, my entire CAD for Newbies playlist is linked in the video description. It is in the older Fusion, but you should be able to pick it up fairly easily with this primer. And it goes through everything from dimensioning to adding constraints and relations to every major tool and all sorts of different things in Fusion. And if you do enjoy it, that should get you up and running pretty quick. But the final thing for this is to export our Makercoin as a 3D printable file, which is known as an STL file. And to do that is very simple when you only have one body, which we only do have one here. Just right click the heading here, Makercoin test version 3, and then save as an STL. And then for our format, save as binary, and refinement, medium is fine, and say okay, and save it off into a folder, send it into your slicer, and 3D print it. To print my Makercoin, I use the CR100, which is this Transformers truck-looking weird 3D printer from Creality. It's a really interesting little toy thing, but it did an admirable job printing my Makercoin in this sparkly red PLA. And if you did enjoy this video, guys, please consider subscribing to Maker's Muse, where it's my aim to empower your creativity through technology. A lot of people are asking for an updated beginner's guide to using Fusion and making a Makercoin, so here it is. Let me know in the comments how you went. Feel free to link me to your Thingiverse uploads of your Makercoins. I'd love to see how you go, and I look forward to seeing you again very shortly here on Maker's Muse. Catch you later, guys. Bye.